Okay, class, so I welcome you back to another important lecture, a very major concept that we have got in context of the plants, and this is entitled as the tropic responses. Now, if we were to recall the characteristics of the living organisms, then we have this sensitivity thing in them, and by the sensitivity, what our meaning was that the living organisms they would not only be detecting the change in the environment, but they would also respond to that change in the environment, or they would respond to the stimulus to which they are exposed to. And as far as we human beings are concerned, so whenever we are exposed to some stimulus, then for sure we would either be moving toward that stimulus or we would run away from that stimulus in order to save ourselves from any of the damage that we can get. But for a moment, if we were to be talking about the plants, so these plants, you know that they are again the living organisms, but the issue with them is that they simply cannot move like us, they cannot change their position like us. So the question would be that if they are exposed to the stimulus and how they would respond to it. So for the plants, we say that since they can't move, so the only option they are left with is that they either have to grow toward the stimulus or they have to grow away from the stimulus. So this ability of the plant where they would grow away or grow toward the stimulus is what we refer to this as the tropic responses, we say. And the plants, they actually have to be responding to two of the major stimuluses, and among them, the first thing that we have got is the light with us, and the second thing or the second stimulus to which they are exposed to, so that would be the gravity exposure on them. So by that, these tropic responses further they split into two major categories. On one side, we have got the phototropism aspect, and on the other way around, we have got this graviotropism aspect with us. So when we say phototropism, so our idea is that the plants they would grow toward the light. And when we are saying graviotropism, so what our idea is that the plant they would grow toward the gravity or they would grow in the direction of the gravity, and we know that the gravitational force this always acts downward. So we have to actually now consider is that what further categories we have or the subdivisions we have got in phototropism. So the first thing that we have here in phototropism is the positive phototropism, and the second thing that we have got with us, so this is the negative phototropism, we say. Now, as the word positive phototropism itself indicates that here the shoots that we have got, and specifically the shoot tips that we have got, so they would grow toward the light. And at the same time, if I were to talk about the roots, so you would be aware of this fact that the roots they would never grow toward the light, but rather than they would grow away from the light because they have to make sure that they go into the soil. So if the roots they are exposed to the light, so they would be exhibiting the negative phototropism because they have to be growing away from the light. Now, if I were to be talking about the graviotropism, so this further has got two categories in it, subtypes in it. One is a positive graviotropism. That means that if I would expose the roots to the gravitational pull, so they would be growing in the direction of the gravity. So the positive graviotropism is exhibited by the roots. Now, if we were to talk about the shoot tips, and if I were to say that I am exposing them to the gravity, so you see that the shoots at any cost they would never grow toward the soil or into the soil, but rather than they would be always growing away from the soil because their concern is not to be absorbing water and ions, but to be getting a lot of light. So, in context of the graviotropism, we say that the shoots they would exhibit negative gravitropism whereby they would grow away from the soil or they would grow against the gravity pull that we have with us. So if I were to like simply summarize all of this, so as I have said that when there is the stimulus is gravity, so the name of the response is graviotropism, where the growth of the plant would be either toward the gravity or away from the gravity. And if there is this positive graviotropic response with us, so this would be the growth of the roots toward the gravity. And if we were to talk about the negative response in terms of the graviotropism, so this would be a growth away from the gravity and this would be exhibited by the shoots. Likewise, as I have mentioned earlier at the top, that when we talk with context to the light stimulus, so the name of the response would be phototropism, and this by definition is that the plants they would either grow toward or they would grow away from the direction of the light, like both the aspects we have to consider here. And if there is this positive response in terms of the light, so this was positive phototropism, and this would be the growth of the shoots toward the light source. And if there is this negative response in case of the light, which we were referring to this as negative phototropism, so that would be the growth of the roots away from the light source, we say. And if you were to quickly see this diagram, now you see that I have got this spot with me, and in this spot, this shoot is actually growing, and you see that this is growing away from the soil or against the direction of the gravity because the gravity is working this way, and the shoots they are growing in opposite direction to the gravity. And if we were to see these roots with us, so they are growing downward in the direction of the gravity toward the soil. So if I were to be applying both the phototropic and the gravitropic responses to this specific plant, so for instance, if I were to talk about the light, so you see that here the shoots, since they are growing toward the light, so the shoots in context of the lights, they are exhibiting the positive phototropism. And these roots, since they are growing away from the light, so in that context, we would say that the roots at the moment they are exhibiting negative phototropism. Likewise, if I were to talk in context of the gravitational force that we have with us, so the gravity is working this way, and the shoots they are growing away or they are growing against the gravitational pull. So in terms of the gravity, the shoots response we would call this as negative graviotropism. And now in context of the roots that we have here, and if we were to talk with respect to the gravitational pull, so they are growing in the direction of the gravity. So we would say that these roots, they are exhibiting positive graviotropism. So if I were to be summarizing this, so you see that the shoots they exhibit positive phototropism but also the negative graviotropism. And if I were to be talking about the roots that we have with us, so they exhibit positive graviotropism and they exhibit negative phototropism. So I hope this would make sense to all of you now. Now, since we have concluded that what the tropic responses are, so here our concern would be that what actually is controlling these tropic responses in case of the plants. So for this, you must know the name of the hormone, and that hormone is referred to as the auxin hormone, and this is the auxin hormone that would be controlling the tropic responses. Now we must know is that where do this auxin hormone is being produced? So we see that in the tips of the shoots and the tips of the roots that are basically the growing tips both in context of the shoots and the roots. So they have got in themselves a kind of unspecialized cells, and these cells they are the merry stem cells. And when these merry stem cells would produce the auxin hormone, under that influence, we would see the tropic responses being exhibited by the root and the shoot tips. Now, this is a very important point that you must never forget if you were to crack this topic. So, if I were to tell you that how come the auxin would be controlling the growth of the shoot and the root toward the light and the gravity stimulus, so the idea is that auxin would always enhance the cell divisions. Like this would increase the number of the cells whenever this would be released in the shoot tips. And if we were to talk about the action of the auxin hormone in case of the root tips, so over there we would say that in the root tips this auxin would inhibit, or this would prevent the number of the cells increasing by cell divisions, or another way it would be inhibiting the cell elongations. Now if I were to be taking you toward the multiple scenarios of where we are required to be justifying the phototropism scenario. So here you see that in the first scenario, I would take the light and I would allow that light to fall on the shoot from all sides equally. Okay, this is not the case that the light is falling on the shoot only from one side, but rather than this is falling from all sides. So if you see that here I have got this shoot tip, and in the shoot tip we have got this meristem cells, and we know that these meristem cells they would be releasing the auxin hormone. Now, if you were to see that if I have got these light rays, and if these light rays they are falling on these shoot tips from all sides, then what these meristem cells would do that they would release the auxin, and that auxin would diffuse downward uniformly. So this means as that immediately below the meristem cells that produce them, so the auxin is getting concentrated here. And as a result of this, the cell divisions and the cell elongations in this part of the shoot, so they would be very much uniform, and all the number of the cells they would be increasing at this point in an equal manner. So as a result of that, the shoot that we have got, so this would directly grow straight upward without any kind of the bending. Now, if we were to consider this condition number two or the scenario number two, where we have this shoe tip with us, and on this shoe tip, the light rays they are only hitting it from one side only, and you see that here the light rays we have got, and they're hitting only this part of the shoot. So now we actually have to be looking on the mechanism that how come in this situation the shoot it would bend in this direction toward the light we say. So now you just have to be very much be conscious here that here this is the shoot that I have got, and this shoot I am dividing it into two equal parts with the help of this imaginary line, and that imaginary line is basically be splitting this shoot tip to two equal halves. Like this half of the shoot is what that is exposed to the light, and this part of the shoe that I have with me, so this is lying on toward the darker side we say, because this side is not receiving any of the light rays. So now the thing that we actually have to do is that I am required to be increasing the number of the cells here on the darker side, so that if the number of the cells would increase more on the darker side, and if the number of the cells increasing less on toward the side of the shoot which is exposed toward the light, so due to that unequal growth of the cells or elongation of the cells, so we would compel this shoot to bend toward the light. So how you would say that the part of the shoot which is exposed to the light, so here there would be less release of the auxin, and the part of the shoots where we have got it on toward the darker side, so here more auxin would be released here on this part, and as a result of that, on toward the darker side, the number of the cells would increase more, and on toward the lighter side, the number of the cells they would be increased less. And as a result of that, this shoe that we have got, so this would now bend toward the light, and this is an example of positive phototropism. Now, moving onward, here we have got this third scenario to consider where I have got this shoot tip, and I have cut the top part of the shoot tip, and no matter from wherever I would expose the light to this shoot, so ultimately it would not show any kind of the bending. The reason is that when the tip of the shoot is cut down, so we lose the meristem cells, and when the meristem cells they are lost, so there would be no release of the auxin hormone, and when the auxin hormone is not being released, then as a result of that, the cells would not elongate, or they would no longer go into the cell division, and as a result of that, this shoot tip would never bend toward the light. Now, class, we come toward the fourth scenario, and this is very important. Now, this is where the examiner is going to trick you. I would take the shoots and now I would place them in the darkness. Now you must know is that when the shoots we have got placed them in the darkness, so there can never be the phototropic response, but rather than that would be the gravitropic response that would be exhibited by the shoots, because we know no matter wherever we go on the planet Earth, whether there is light or whether there is no light, the gravity would always act where downwards. So the situation that the examiner would present you, he would take a pot and in the pot he would be showing you the stem that grows like this, and he would also say that I have placed this shoot in the darkness. Now you tell us that what kind of the response this shoot have exhibited. Now, the thing is that since this shoot is bending upward and this is against the direction of the gravity, so I would say that the shoot here is exhibiting the negative graviotropism. And if we were to be looking on toward the role that Auxin has contributed, now here you see again I am dividing this shoot part into two equal parts, and now I would like the shoot to bend upward in the absence of light. So again on the lower part of the shoot I would deposit auxin more, and on the upper part of the shoot the auxin deposited would be less. So as a result of that, on the lower side there would be more cell divisions, there would be more cell elongations comparative to the upper side. So as a result of that, the shoot is bending away from the gravity or away from the soil, and this is the negative graviotropism that is now has got exhibited by the shoots only when we have placed it in the darkness. So if you were to be looking on toward these points that I have written, so you would say that more oxygen is released on the lower side of the shoot and less oxygen would be released on the upper side of the shoot, and as a result the cell would elongate more on the lower side comparative to the upper side, and as a result of that the shoot has bent upward. So here the last thing would be that what advantages do we have got when the plants are exhibiting the phototropic response. So you see that whenever the shoots they would bend more toward the light, so they would absorb more light. And as a result of that, they would photosynthesize more. And when the plant shoot tips they photosynthesize more. So as a result of that, they would be able to make more sugars, and these more sugars they would be utilizing them for their growth aspect. Now, I hope that this phenomenon of the tropic responses that we have got in the case of the plants would make sense to all of you. And for the next class or the lecture, we will begin to see that how come the roots that we have got they exhibit the graviotropism.